As I said, I really appreciate everyone's time today. This is Chad McDaniel with Execs in the Know, and I've got Dan Gordon with West Interactive. And Dan, I'm so glad you were able to spend some time with us today, and I'm going to introduce you here real shortly. And I know you've got a great message and story, Dan, that you're going to want to share with us in the group here. So the topic today was really about the mobile shift, and we called it How to Proactively Deliver a Better Customer Experience, and couldn't think of a better discussion and topic. And I would bet that no one on the webinar today would argue against the explosive growth mobile has had in the new economy, and how it's opened up, I think, numerous opportunities for both kind of newcomers and also customer engagement with our customers. And us as service leader executives, customer first is always of mind to us. So then it comes to with this, how do we kind of create this better engagement and experience with our customers through the mobile shift? And one of the key takeaways from today's conversation is going to be about what we're calling this proactive reach that solves a number of issues of service opportunity, but knowing our customers and ultimately how we're going to serve them. I know it was, I heard referenced, and I think, Dan, you brought this to my attention in 2016, the new customer currency is what's called transparency. And the importance for brands to be transparent with their customers and how we get, and we'll get into some of those examples later, but I thought that was extremely relevant, Dan, and I'm glad you shared that with me. And then I think second, how do we leverage the data that can help you stay ahead of your customers and provide a few key best practices to reach them on their own terms? So Execs in the Know in partnership with West, and for all our listeners, we did recently work together, I think, on a very insightful white paper on this topic. And in this white paper, there is an excellent outline of both how you can use proactive messaging in various industries, so whatever vertical you're in, and at the same point an outline of a 5-step plan on where and how to begin. So I'd encourage you, if you'd like to get a free copy of this white paper, you can just email me, chad@execsintheknow.com, and I'd be happy to send it over to you. It's got some great reading, additional insights and examples that we won't be able to get into today's call. So let's get started. I wanted to say, first of all, if you're not familiar with West and West Interactive, I'd highly encourage you to. They are a great global provider of communication and network infrastructure solutions. I know West does many things to manage and support essential enterprise communications with their services, everything from unified communication, interactive services, carrier services, agent services, a variety of things. And Dan, you've been a great partner with Execs in the Know over the years, really trying to help advance the learning and sharing in the industry as a whole. Greatly appreciated. Dan, you've got a big job over there. I know you're responsible for West Interactive's go-to-market strategies, including all the marketing, analyst relations, and offer development. I think you're managing all the go-to-market strategies and tactics to conceive, design, develop, and deliver sustainable solutions that drive customer success for your clients. So, Dan, I'm going to just turn it for you a minute and have you say hello and just quickly introduce yourself, and then I'd like to go to a couple of quick polls.
Great. Thanks, Chad. I appreciate that. Welcome, everybody. And to Chad's comments earlier, we're really excited to talk about this mobile shift and give you a couple of best practices, ideas, a couple of use cases, and we're going to try to be as conversational as we can in this discussion. And at the end of it, our intent is that you walk away with 2 or 3 things that you might be able to take and apply to your business or apply to your customer journey and experiences that they have in your business. So with that, Chad, thank you very much. I appreciate it. And like I said, we look forward to trying to create a conversational discussion today.
Awesome. Well, thank you again, Dan. So I'm going to turn to the audience attention. If you folks can help me, I just want to kind of gauge our thoughts around this, and I'm going to launch a quick poll for you here. And if you could go to the screen here, the question is, how active is your current company in promoting the use of self-service channels to your customers for service support versus telephone? And the answers could be very active, somewhat, not a priority at this time. So just take a minute, throw your input in there. I'm going to just give it a couple more seconds and see where we're at. Right now, interesting to see these results, and I'll show it to the audience here in a second. All right, so we're going to close it down here, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And let me see if we can show the poll. And what I had here, the results were 65% were very active, part of their everyday life, and 23 were somewhat, and 12% not a priority at this time. So, Dan, any surprises on that? I mean, I'm glad to hear that 65% are very active.
Yeah, I'm a little surprised that it's not higher than that. Yeah. Hopefully we'll create some use cases or some ideas for people to look at that channel as an emerging channel that they should be using.
Yeah. So again, thank you very much, and I'm going to go back to our screen. I just got one more quick poll, Dan, that I want to go to here, and I'm going to put us back on here. So the next poll would be, and this is the last question, and we'll move on. So here's a quick question for everyone is, if you were to poll your customers, what percentage would say they would use more than 3 channels to conclude one interaction? Small percent, common requirement, or we have problems? So if you could take a moment and maybe, can you see that slide, Dan?
Yep.
Okay, so hopefully we got some folks voting in on here. And interesting to see where this is going to come out. All right, so we're going to close this down, and what I had here, Dan, was 70% had small percent, 10% or less, 20% common requirement, and 10% had the third. Any general reaction quickly to that, Dan?
Yeah, it seems that you know, you'll find customers transversing channels pretty frequently to solve one interaction. So these results are going to bleed right into conversations we're having throughout this dialogue in terms of how do we use proactive mobility in creating different customer experiences.
Absolutely. Well, first of all, thank you to all our listeners and audience. We appreciate your participation. We'll make sure we get those actual results out to you post-webinar. You'll be getting a link for the webinar tomorrow, along with any of the poll results that we discussed here today. So quickly, Execs in the Know, we're here for you. We're your customer advocate. If you're not involved with us, I strongly would encourage. There's a number of things we're doing to help guide and share overall best practices and leadership within the industry. Very fortunate that we've got a terrific corporate advisory board. All of these brands here, at the end of the day, it's about leaders sharing with leaders, and our advisory board does a lot to say, hey, look, we're here to advance this overall industry and learning as a whole, and so forth. So we're customer driven, and as I said, there's a number of things we're doing. I hope that if you have any questions, feel free to reach out, or you can see all our information at execsintheknow.com. Dan, there's a good looking photo of you I've got up there right now. So that's Mr. Dan Gordon, and Dan, we're going to just turn right into you. Let's get started on the mobile shift.
Thanks, Chad. I appreciate that. I think we can all agree that this mobile shift is happening, and it started 10 plus years ago with the advancements of the mobile phone itself. And one of the things that we talked about, Chad, at your conference back in the February timeframe was this idea of emerging channels and how do brands solve for emerging channels, and how do they integrate emerging channels into their customer journey, and what's the value of those. And so we're looking forward to going through some of those emerging channels. And you think about 10 years ago, and this idea of the BlackBerry, if you will, and I'm probably showing my age by bringing up the original BlackBerry, that I thought, man, I got black and white email holstered on my hip. I mean, can it get any better than that? And I just I thought, man, it can't get better than having email, and thus began this constant, always on, 24/7. I got email now, and so I'm always on, and that shift started really with that evolution. And now 10 years later or 15 years later, you think about everything you can do on your mobile device, everything from shopping and getting directions and searching for locations and finding your music and creating social media and even linking it to devices that will give you your pulse readout. I mean, the things that your mobile device does now, it's pretty amazing. I don't think it's going to slow down anytime soon. And this idea of 24/7 being constantly on, there's some research from Morgan Stanley that has shown 91% of U.S. citizens have their mobile device within reach 24/7. And
wow.
maybe I'm one of the 9% because I try to put mine down at night, but it is constantly a device that people are reaching for all of the time. And in fact, spending via a mobile device, retail spending via mobile device, topped out at $100 billion in 2015. So this device is just this thing that is converging channels and applications, and there's so much that people can do about or with this device. And quite frankly, it's not even just about an outbound phone anymore. I don't know. Again, I'll show my age. My kids are in high school, and I don't think they know that mobile device is actually a phone. I think they use it for everything but a phone. So.
Well, there's no question this, consumers are expecting the same exceptional experiences on the mobile device, and the growth and the statistics behind it speak to, okay, we all know that, and we're going to, how do we figure that out? And I guess, so Dan, this sort of begs the question is, how do folks on the phone or listening today, how do we start to make a conscious shift from reactive to proactive communications in this particular channel? What would be your thoughts there?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of answers really, but we're going to focus primarily on the integration or convergence of data within that mobile device and how we can use data to look at integrating this emerging channel into the customer experience. So when it comes to kind of this intersection of the device and data and ultimately changing the way that we search, collaborate, and communicate, and use that device to proactively communicate with customers. And I think there are two primary elements to do that. One is to improve self-service options, and the second is to create more personal interactions. So we're going to talk a little bit today about those two goals, how to improve some self-service options and what are the benefits and some use cases around that. And then the other is around how do we create more personal interactions and create more personalized experiences using data in that mobile device.
So then let's start, Dan, with using data to improve self-service options. Can you give us some reasons why you think it's important and some general best practices for folks listening today?
Yeah, I'll give you two quick stats and then we'll kind of move into some of the meat of the conversation. One stat that you're seeing on the screen is 1 in 4 calls into the call center are either unnecessary or avoidable. And that's primarily research from a customer care perspective and not even from a sales, marketing, or collections perspective. So there are quite a few phone calls that come into your call center that can be avoided if you look at the integration of outbound into your customer journey. The other stat that you'll see is 75% of customers prefer to use self-service and expect a self-service option in different channels. So I'll go back to kind of joke I made about my kids, but they truly would rather text somebody even when it comes to customer service than it would be to call somebody. So those are kind of stats and reflects how important or how visible the mobile device is and the convergence of this device with the experience itself. So it's becoming one and the same. People are expecting the same experience on that mobile device as they are in person and as they are across brands.
It'd be interesting, Dan, and I don't have a poll, but if we could ask our audience how many people prefer self-service as their first option. I'm no millennial, kind of double that, but the point is, I know for me personally, whenever I'm dealing with a brand, my first reach is always self-service, if that's an option, and it's kind of frustrating to me when I don't have that ability. So let's talk about that promoting the next piece here, promoting some of the self-service channel.
Yeah, and I'm gonna back up just a quick second, Chad, because I think that's an interesting question that people would respond to. Do they prefer self-service? And I think there's this trade-off between how urgent an issue is and how complex it is. And so the more urgent and complex the issue is in the eyes of the consumer, the more likely they are to try to get to an assisted experience versus the less urgent, less complex. It's more self-service, and they kind of move up that chain, if you will. The more urgent and complex it is. And so if you look at what are some of those best practices in promoting self-service channels, I'll give you a couple. One is look at the channels that you're using today and think about other ways that you can introduce another channel within that existing channel. I'll give you an example. So you're on a phone call in an IVR, and either you're on hold or you're trying to do something in the IVR that maybe you can't do in the application itself. Here's a couple of options. One, you could push a text message via your mobile device and create a link or create some conversation that you're now promoting a different channel within the voice channel. So you could create some sort of dialogue. Maybe it's an SMS dialogue all of a sudden, or maybe you can push a video. So think about ways to promote a new channel within an existing channel. And the second, go ahead, Chad.
No, I was just going to say that's a great comment, and it would be great to get some examples. Any other examples folks may think about on the call? There is a chat box there if you want to throw a comment, or if you want to say, hey, I'm a self-service kind of guy or gal, or I'm a traditional. Feel free to. I just love to hear our thoughts from our audience. But that raises a good example, and I know we've got some others. Dan, you need me to go over to the next slide here on some of the best practices? I know you gave one there, and I think you also have some more.
Yeah, and I think the if you talk about just mapping your customer journey, I know it sounds kind of cliche in many respects, but when you're looking at your customer journey, I think that there's opportunities. I know our clients see it. I know we work with clients across the country, and there's opportunity to look at the data that they have available and determine and use some of that data to determine what are some of the other channels to offer, when the best timing to offer that channel is. So don't be afraid to use the data that you have within your organization when you're mapping that journey to find opportunities to introduce channels. And again, one other point that's not on the slide, I'd be very clear about the problem you're trying to solve when it comes to the introduction of another channel. So that will help you really identify, if you're really clear about the business problem you're trying to solve or the customer experience friction you're trying to solve for your customer, I think you'll find opportunities to look at or introduce another channel within the existing channel you have. So, and we'll talk about, if you flip to the next slide, we'll talk about tech support. So one of our clients is a cable telco satellite that we're using voice only to handle some inquiries and do some technical FAQs. And they wanted to look at some of those calls they thought, that could be avoided from their call center, those 1 in 4 calls that we mentioned earlier. And is there a way to create some self-service options and offer the caller an opportunity to chat via text message rather than wait on the phone and or wait for a live agent in the call center? So we tested this at a pilot program and introduced SMS chat for technical questions that emanated from the IVR. So this company was pretty specific about the problem that they had with trying to alleviate some pressure from the reps and some of the calls that they had and integrate some kind of simple technical FAQs that might be able to be more quickly resolved via a chat function rather than navigate the IVR and then talk to an agent. And so what they found in doing this program was 80% of the customers that used SMS chat were extremely satisfied with it. So that told them that, hey, this is a good idea. We're going to continue to offer some alternate channels for self-service. And they also realized a $3.4 million savings in a year using SMS chat. So, and to me, those are real numbers. I mean, $3.4 million certainly is going to be a meaningful number to many organizations, and I think it's an opportunity to look at the return on investment of that SMS chat program and think, geez, the consumers really like it, And by the way, we're saving quite a bit of money in it. So by using it. So I think that's a pretty good use case or a pretty good scenario where a client looked at that opportunity and said, hey, we can keep people in a channel that they prefer and save some money and yet not degrade the self-service and the customer experience.
That's that is a great example. And for our listeners, if there's any questions you want to ask or make sure I ask Dan in regards to the example he used or anything around it, feel free to use the chat box there and or the questions, and I will definitely see if I can get them out to you, Dan. So, as I said, a great example, but let's look at another point I think, Dan, you made earlier. How can you get more proactive by using data to make every interaction more personal, especially when it comes to mobile technologies? And I think the key word's proactive here, but proactive engagement. So why is it important, in any particular best practices you can share with our listeners?
Perfect. Yeah, I think there's an opportunity to create more personal interactions. I think one of the ways to do that is, we'll go back to the front end of the conversation around data and how you can use data that you own, data that maybe your vendors own, and or third-party data that you can append and look at opportunities to create revenue, to create cost savings, maybe reduce the inbound load into the call center. So, nearly 2/3 of customers that subscribe to mobile marketing indicate they've made a purchase as a result of receiving highly relevant mobile messaging. So if you think about that, you're on your mobile device, you get a text message, or you get some sort of communication, that push text that says, hey, I see you are here, maybe using location-based services. I see you at this mall. Here's and I know you've shopped at ABC store before. Here's a coupon, or here's an opportunity, a sale, percentage off sale at a store. People react to those, and research shows that nearly 2/3 of consumers who subscribe to mobile marketing are making purchases as a result of that. So I think there's opportunity, Chad, in giving customers choice and keeping those customers in the preferred channels of choice. So if you use this data and you test this outbound proactive messaging and people respond to it, which you're going to find they will, they're telling you, if you will, that that's a channel of choice that they like and oftentimes that they prefer. So don't be afraid to use the data that you have and test it and look to see if there's ways that you can reduce inbound load and generate revenue. So, some best practices around this idea, this concept, an integration of using data to create a different experience in proactive mobile. I'll give you two really quick, easy ones. Start somewhere and start simple. So that's the first one. Don't try to solve everything or even anything complex. It's not a one-size-fits-all. It's not a panacea, if you will. But find a use case where people are using their mobile device or could use it, and insert that channel into the journey. And so, start somewhere. Start kind of simply. Go back to the example I gave earlier about technical FAQs. That was a simple way that this client of ours looked at their opportunity and said, geez, they're on their mobile device. We can push some detailed information to them without having to back up the call center or the IVR. And the second piece of advice is, don't forget about the data element. Look where you can use data to enhance that moment in time along the journey so that you can think about where you might be able to insert channels of choice or different opportunities to create collaboration or communication along that journey using what your customers are telling you. I mean, they're by responding to proactive notifications, they're telling you that's a channel of choice that they like. And so if you know that and you kind of use that data that you have in your organization, you can begin to look at the journey and think about where else can we integrate this idea of mobile or of proactive mobile into the journey. So I'll give you an example, a use case that we worked with one of our clients, and they had 3 goals in this use case. One was to increase revenue, one was to integrate an emerging channel, and to go kind of back to a piece of advice was they wanted to start pretty small. So they wanted to start with a really specific use case around how to generate more revenue via proactive notifications in the mobile device for a pay-per-view fight. So I'll just give you that scenario again. They were marketing a pay-per-view fight, and they knew, or they wanted to test, their hypothesis was that they're going to market to customers via text message to the mobile device, and they think by doing that they can generate more revenue, more subscribers, or more takes, if you will, of the pay-per-view event. So that was their hypothesis, if you will. So if you look at the kind of the process that this company went through in order to kind of converge mobile and data together and create some revenue and cost savings, they looked across this process. And it's again, more detailed than this, but this will at least give you some high-level steps of what you can look at to create a use case and create a test case. This company started out with what they knew. So they had some information about their customer base. They had some information about proactive and mobility. They had some use case ideas around where they thought it might fit. So, and they had some data components. And then they said, okay, now we have that. In order for us to test this idea, this pilot program, they looked at, what other data did they need? What else did they need to know about this potential buyer, and where could they get that data? So they looked at vendor-owned data. They looked at third-party data. They looked in their own organization to find all of these different components that they thought, okay, if we're going to test this program, we're going to try to get people to buy a pay-per-view fight via proactive text message, what sort of data do we have? What sort of data do we need? And what are we going to test against? So their hypothesis was, based on timing, that they felt they could generate more revenue based on the timing of when they offered the fight via text message. So they really started to evaluate and look at this idea of timing and how data could affect the timing of how data could affect the timing of the delivery of the proactive offer. So they tested some demographic data, some psychographic data against the time element. And their hypothesis was, by sending the notification or the offer via notification at a certain time, they could generate more revenue. So what they did is they took these data components and started to do some A/B testing, keeping variables, one variable the same, and then testing it against other variables, right? So they basically did some A/B testing, and they developed this predictive model of, if we do this, then this is going to happen. And so what they ultimately found, in what we found together in doing this work, was that timing did affect timing did affect the revenue side of the equation, changing the opportunity of when the proactive notification was sent. So what we found was the optimal time to send the offer via text message was 2 days before the fight. And they tested all kinds of time frames, but we found that the timing of the offer was critical, and using the data to generate and to kind of narrow down the exact timing of the offer was the key in terms of generating more revenue, which they created about $2 million in additional revenue, and they received about a 61% lift in the response rates to that offer. So they looked at this, opportunity to use the mobile device and create a marketing offer via the mobile device proactively to generate more revenue. And quite frankly, and again, $2 million in my world is kind of a big number, and so I would take that in a heartbeat.
Well, Dan, there's a number of, I want to stop there, and that's been a great example. It's generated a number of questions or comments, and I just want to, we'll stop for a second here, and I want to try to incorporate a few of them. I know, Tom, I don't know, it's really a comment or a question, but it is just more of a comment. Live agent chat or automated bot chat. Tom, you can expand on that a little bit further if you like, but Dan, any reaction to live agent chat or automated bot chat, not necessarily from the example you gave, but in general?
The examples I've given are all live agent chat that is what I would describe as sort of virtual agents. So it's almost a combination. It's peeling off some of the canned responses that can be done in chat, and when the sort of library, if you will, of canned responses have been exhausted, there's an agent component on the back end of it. So in the use cases we've presented here, it's a little bit of both. It's a little bit of, an automated access to some FAQs that can be interpreted via natural language and pushed back out. And then, so when that library, if you will, is exhausted, there's an agent component that's looking at the chat itself and responding and then engaging in the chat.
Okay. And Brian, I'm just going to read his, I guess, question or commentary from the example. Brian says, what feedback loops have you suggested to use the data in other areas, i.e. C-suite, product development, sales? Do you have any case studies, or do you have more case studies or any examples around that? So what feedback loops have you suggested to use the data in other areas? Anything come to mind offhand there, Dan?
Yeah, I'm not sure that this will answer the question directly, and if it doesn't, please maybe drop me an email. My email address will be on the end of the presentation. But what we found in doing this work is we've created an ROI document that we then share within that client's organization. And so I'll go back to, be really specific and clear about what business problem you're trying to solve using proactive mobility and this, convergence of data. And I think the more clear you are around what you're trying to solve for, the easier it is to create the use case and then the ROI behind it, so then you can begin to socialize it. So what's happened in the case of this UFC example, we had limited access to the client's data. They were like, we'll give you a little bit of access. We're not quite sure that this is something that we really buy into, but you guys are pretty adamant that you believe there's opportunity to create more revenue. And so we started small. I mean, we started with, this is an example over 10 fights. So we started the first fight with, the results were pretty minimal, but yet the client was like, okay, well, if you think there's more, let's do one more, and then one more, and then one more. All of a sudden, the 10th fight was a $2 million swing in revenue. And I think, that progression of kind of starting small to gain momentum was big, and the constant communication within the client's organization about the results created more momentum. So now this client is opening the doors to the data and saying, what else do you guys want? This is starting to become real. And so that feedback loop has been, back into the client and really some targeted marketing efforts within that client itself to promote the results that we've created in that campaign. So I'm not sure if the question directly.
No, I think that's very insightful. And Dan, if you're okay with a few more questions coming in, and I'm first of all, you're listening to Dan Gordon. He's the SVP of Strategy and Development at West Interactive. And thank you, Dan, again for your time today and sharing some of these case studies and insights. I would encourage all of our listeners, let's take advantage of the time we're together, this investment of time. If there's things that are sparking interest or questions, we'll definitely try to get them in there. Dan, I know we've got a few more slides, but I'm going to throw one more comment or question your way, if that's okay. And this is from Burge, and it says, is there any instances that the proactive mobility failed? How do you address or resolve that? Was the question from Burge. Any suggestions or advice there, or have you seen anything like that?
Yeah, I mean, anytime you're trying to integrate emerging channels like this, you are going to run into opportunities or instances where it just doesn't work, and we subscribe to this fail fast concept, right? Where, hey, we think this is a good idea, and you create this hypothesis around, hey, we think that using proactive mobility or using proactive engagement will help solve this problem, and it hasn't. And I think I'll go back to kind of this trade-off between complexity and urgency, and I think that becomes use case scenarios where the consumer on the other end doesn't feel like that interaction is being resolved as quickly, and so the chat ends, or the library, if you will, of FAQs isn't robust enough address the issue that consumer has. So we've seen that honestly in some of the retail pharma space, where we've had some interaction where we've introduced this idea and it hasn't worked really well. And I think the other component where we're kind of scratching the surface, I even think not just us, I think as an industry is scratching the surface, is this idea of how to integrate MMS in with concept of the mobile device and how we can push video and use video. What are some of the limitations, you know, from a technology perspective and a networking perspective, I think are hard. We've tested some MMS that hasn't gone as well as we'd like it, mostly because of some of the network restrictions, if you will. So we're testing some of that, I think, as an industry. MMS is an emerging channel. I think it's going to be something that grows over time, but we've done some testing that hasn't gone as well.
Okay. No, and again, Dan, thank you. I know there's not necessarily a complete absolute right or wrong. It's just different ideas and best practice sharing and insights, and everything you've been sharing has been terrific. And I just want to point out at the beginning of the webinar, I'd mentioned the white paper. There was a specific section that I thought was very useful. How to use proactive messaging in specific industries, and I think you gave some great examples here, maybe some ideas that we haven't even thought about. So if I'm in healthcare and pharmacy, there's probably 10, 12 different ways you could potentially use proactive messaging. If I'm in retail, consumer, financial services, insurance, travel, logistics, there's all these different ways that maybe we haven't thought out of the box before. So I'd like to encourage the listeners to get a copy of that white paper. Again, it's free, and there were some good insights on that particular graph and piece. So Dan, I'm going to move on here, and I know, as I alluded to, there were kind of 5 bullet points. You said kind of how to get started, and what's interesting, you know, map your customer journey. It sounds so cliche-ish. You know, I go to a lot of leadership gatherings, and you ask people who's done customer journey mapping, and I think 9 out of 10 or all 10 raise their hand. But there's kind of a question behind those questions, and we can't just take it at face value. So one of your recommendations, start with customer journey. Let's assume most people have. What's missing? Where do we go from here? And any insights? What would be your recommendations? And we'll go through some more of the slides here.
So like you said, Chad, I think many of us are starting to map the customer journey. Oftentimes we find working with clients that they're mapping components of the journey, maybe not the entire journey. So they're mapping components within their functional area, for example, rather than mapping the entire journey. And we talked about it at the conference back in February. You know, this idea of silos is something that the industry needs to address, and the breaking down of these silos and kind of functional ownership across the customer journey. So a couple of things around this customer journey. Look at the entire journey, not just the functional area that you've got responsibility for in terms of journey mapping. And 2 things. 1, don't forget about the data that you have within that journey and how to use the data. So if you have data that can help identify callers and reduce the amount of time and information that they have to share with an agent, or share to get to the right spot within the IVR, or get from web to IVR, use that data when you're starting to look at the journey itself. And the thing that I think most of us forget about in customer journey mapping is sort of this emotional side, the softer side, versus just the really smart side of journey mapping. This is what my customer is doing. There's also a question around, what is your customer feeling when they're going through this journey? And are they feeling friction? Are they feeling happy? Are they feeling something that is creating a sense of, geez, I wish I could do this in another way? And there's an important emotional component to journey mapping that I think is just starting to be explored. So mapping the journey sounds really cliche, but expand the journey beyond what you think. Think about how to use data in that journey, and don't forget about the emotional side of that journey, what your customers are feeling through that journey, and that will help you identify some friction points. And second, Chad, I think, you know, in that next slide, we're talking about investing energy to create business value. I will tell you philosophically, customer experiences are created through feeling your brand. And employees must understand, align, and commit to your brand in order to activate it with your customers. So brands and their experiences are built from the inside out, not the outside in. And so if you invest some time and energy, not just in the what I'll call the smart side of your organization and all these metrics, but into the kind of healthy side around culture and the integration of people and technology and culture together, you're going to find that your employees start to live your brand, and in doing that, they're going to create experiences with your external consumers, customers, patients, that is more valuable and reflective than what you can do without having this inside-out approach. So invest energy into your employee base to create these brand advocates, because you want your customers to feel the brand that you've built. So that's a big one that I think is often overlooked or maybe not considered as important. And I think brands that do that really well, if you look at Southwest Airlines, they hire people. Their people are really a reflection internally of that brand. And you see that in every experience you have if you fly Southwest Airlines. I know I do. I fly them as much as I can. And they invest a lot of money in those brand advocates. So I'd encourage you to do that. Third, be a trend predictor. Keep an eye on your competition. And again, I would suggest, I would advocate that you look beyond maybe your traditional competitive set, because consumers don't compare you to your competition directly. I believe they compare you to their experiences more broadly. And so the experience you have at Southwest Airlines, you might sort of project onto experiences that you might have in shopping at a retailer, for example. And you're like, gee, why can't it be like so-and-so company? Why can't my experience here be like so-and-so? Why can't my experience when I pick up my car when it's serviced, that I get a text message when it's done, and I get different ways of communication? Why can't it be like that in the airline space? So look beyond your traditional competitive set, expand your view, because your customers aren't comparing you necessarily to your direct competition. They're comparing you to experiences they have across brands more broadly and globally than they ever have before. And so if you kind of look at that more broadly, you're going to find places in your customer journey where you begin to think about, where might there be other friction, and where might there be other opportunity to introduce these channels, and sort of combine this view of your competitive set, this expanded view, with industry trends that are happening, again, not just in your industry, but more broadly. And we talk about, Chad, we've talked about this in some of your events, these ideas or these trends of, I want my interaction to be more personal, I want my interaction to be smarter, I want my interaction to be faster, and I want to be in more control of that interaction. Those are broad trends. Those are broad feelings, if you will, that consumers have, regardless of whether you're a provider, an insurance carrier, a retailer, a cable telco satellite company, a travel hospitality company. Consumers want those experiences to be smarter, to be faster, to be more personal, and to be more empowered. So look at those trends and figure out, are there other trends that might impact this customer journey. And then I think when you do that, the fourth idea is make intelligent use of the data and get started by using it. Don't forget that you have access to multiple data sources. You have data, your vendors have data, and there are third-party vendors that have data. So think about the experience that you might want to design and the journey that you might desire your consumer to have versus what it is today. And where can you plug in data to understand more about the journey itself and to make improvements in that journey? And again, start small. Start small to gain some momentum, to gain some wins and gain some traction. You don't have to solve everything immediately. I think people get overwhelmed with journey mapping and they identify these gaps and then they become overwhelmed with where to start and they never get started. So start small, start simply. It kind of bleeds into the fifth recommendation, which is think about eliminating as much of this one-size-fits-all mentality and try to make those experiences and use the data to make those experiences as personal as you can be. And again, start small, start simply, and I think if you do that, you're going to gain some momentum, you're going to gain some ROI, and you're going to be able to create momentum internally for more revenue, more cost savings, and even more brand advocates and higher NPS. So those are the 5 steps that we would recommend, and again, those are pointed out in the white paper as well.
Well, Dan, I know you've given so much. I mean, thank you. And you know, I want to go back on a couple of points that you just brought in the 5 steps, or the steps we just discussed here about implementation. And I know it's interesting. You know, we've talked for years about the importance of data collection, reporting action of data, but from your perspective, do you think organizations are making progress? You know, and if you do or don't, I mean, why do you think this has been so challenging? Any insights on there? So I guess the first question is, do you think we, fast forward to 2016, we're making progress in this discussion of data? And you know, why do you think that's been some challenges, or that continues to be a challenge? I have my opinions, but I'd love to hear yours.
Yeah, I think so. There's a continuum of data and the ability to go from sort of what I would describe as reactionary, backward-looking analysis to prescriptive and predictive and prescriptive data and data science and analytics. And I think we're starting as an industry to really do much better job at looking at historical data and reporting and data mining that information in order to predict a different outcome using a hypothesis. So I'll go back to that UFC fight example I gave you. What we did there was data mining. I mean, we looked at reports, we looked at information that we had. It was kind of backward looking. We thought, okay, given this data set, and we're going to test it against a different hypothesis, and we're going to try to gain a different outcome. And so I think the industry as a whole is getting much better at this data mining component. I think there's all kinds of opportunities to move up that value chain, if you will, and really begin to migrate into predictive analytics and then prescriptive, where you really start to drive a different experience or drive different offers and different channels in a very, very proactive way, where you're predicting or you're prescribing the next behavior that you want your consumer to take. And I think almost every single organization we have this conversation with looks at that model, if you will, from kind of data analytics and mining to how do I use it to predict behavior, to how do I use it to prescribe the next best action. I think there are a lot of organizations kind of at this first layer of how am I really using data mining effectively to change the experience. So I think there's all kinds of upside opportunity. I think we're, as an industry, we're starting to really do a much better job with this data mining component.
Yeah, and you know, we talk about the importance of data, and again, for our listeners, if you've got any comments or best practices or anything you'd like to share, feel free to add them in the question box, and I'll make sure I try to get them addressed here where we have a few minutes left. And you know, the data thing continues to be paramount amongst many other things, and we could have a full webinar just on the data piece and component. But I like, Dan, your approach where you're taking small actions of success and effort and getting to that. And there's a lot of ways you can do that very, I won't say easily, but you know, things we're not thinking about with proactive communication, especially within the mobile piece of the mobile customer engagement. So, you know, I guess, go ahead, Dan, you have a comment?
Oh, no.
Okay, so we've talked a number of pieces about making the consumer's mobile shift successful and kind of the customer care channel of it. What do you see as sort of often the hardest part of organizations to embed in their organizations about the consumer mobile shift?
Repeat the question again, Chad, I'm sorry.
Well, we've talked about a number of pieces today for making the consumer's mobile shift successful for customer care, and I guess I was just trying to think about what do you see, or you know, do you see often the hardest part of organizations to embed in their organizations or try to do from a mobile proactive engagement component?
You know, the conversations we have with clients, I think, are focused around what are those opportunities or what are those use cases? And I think organizations kind of struggle with the use case itself, creating the use case, and how to get off the dime and start. And so I'll go back to that white paper. There's a bunch of different ideas around, kind of use cases in different industries. And I think if you look at some of those and think, oh, I could use an alternative channel here, or I could introduce another channel in this use case, and think of your customer from the outside in, and kind of think about experiences that you have as a consumer and how that might apply to your own business. I think sometimes we don't see the forest for the trees, and we don't slow down enough to go, oh, I had a really cool experience over here, and what if they did something different? We've given an example before of kind of emerging channels and almost inanimate objects that are going to provide data and insights down the road. I mean, think about, I'm sitting in a chair right now, maybe many of you are sitting in a chair, and think about what the chair could tell you down the road. It could tell you things like maybe your heart rate. It could tell you things like whether or not you're fidgeting, whether or not you're kind of falling asleep because this hasn't been as enjoyable as you thought. So there's all kinds of data that even a chair could gather from just you sitting in that chair. And I think people oftentimes don't just get creative and don't just kind of create these what-if scenarios. So I think the hard part, Chad, is generating the use case and thinking about the different applications of what might be. And I think in doing that, oftentimes we're like, well, that's going to be too hard, or that crosses so many different parts of our organization that I'll never get buy-in for it. I think those are the hurdles. Those are the things that we typically find in having these conversations. Like, well, it'd be great if we could do that, but I don't own that part of the customer journey, or I don't own that part. That's not my functional area, and it's really hard to get some to buy-in. And so I think the use case, the idea behind it, the hypothesis, the business case associated with it. If we spend this is what we think we're going to get different. Those are things that are really, really critical in terms of getting momentum and gaining some traction internally to do this differently.
And I think we're going to have to, you talk about the concept, use case, business case, and the other things mentioned, I guess, Dan, is we're going to have, the reality is we're going to have to get used to this, because when I think of your chair example, I think of the Internet of Things. The thing that comes to my mind immediately is the back-end support of that. How are we going to support these new technologies that are absolutely going to come, and they're going to give us the insightful stuff, but as service leaders, what channel is that coming through? How are we supporting that? And how are, not just data and systems, but how that all is going to be tied in. So I think I guess my comment is we've got to get very thoughtful in this at this moment, as far as the way you've outlined the need for the use case, business case, and strong analysis and understanding around it.
Yeah, and to your point earlier, Chad, there could be a whole session about data and data architecture and enterprise architecture and those back-end systems to consolidate and consume that data. And I'll tell you, I mean, that is a big challenge that organizations are facing, which is, data resides in so many different places in the organization that just consolidating it into a single warehouse, if you will, can be a challenge. So, yeah, I mean, I think it's a big challenge that the industry is going to face in the coming, 24 to 36 months, which is a consolidation and consumption of data and the infrastructure to support it, and then, frankly, the requirement of the people side of the equation with respect to having those data scientists to be able to interpret the data, because having data is great, but if you can't draw correlations to it and we can't draw predictive models to it, then it's just data, and it's not really actionable information. I think turning data into that actionable information requires some really smart people that I think you're starting to see a lot of growth and traction in terms of data scientists and the ability of those people to really use data. So it's going to be a big challenge, no question.
And I think of our poll question, one of them was what % would say they use more than 3 channels to conclude one interaction, and I think there was 30% said it was a common requirement, happened 10 to 30% of the time, and I think that complexity is going to continue but we've got to get better as brand organizations to resolving service issues in that interaction, especially when there's a lot of channel hopping, or are we trying to make it easy for our customers to do business with us versus, going back to that journey mapping and all the other stuff that we've talked about here, Dan. I'm going to leave on one last question here, and I got a couple last-minute slides for our audience here. So, Dan, I always like to leave sort of on a time goes so fast, but leave on a very positive note. And we're all going to go back to our day jobs after the webinar. And I guess if there was, it's hard to isolate to one because they all kind of go within synchronization. But what's the one takeaway or the one action you really want to leave these listeners and our audience with today from today's conversation, I guess? Would there be sort of that one piece you really would encourage and support people to take away?
Yeah, that's a really tough question to narrow it down to one thing because I've probably talked about way too many, frankly. But I would focus on, if there's one thing to take away, look at use cases, create use cases, look at opportunities where you might be able to introduce an alternate channel, an emerging channel within an existing channel, and think about, as you've mapped your journey, where those instances or use cases might be, and start small. Start with a simple idea to gain traction, because most of these organizations that are doing this journey mapping and customer experience are cost centers, not necessarily revenue generation centers. And so I think the use case and the momentum and showing some initial return and success is critical. And I think that's all driven from the use case itself.
Well stated, and Dan, thank you so much. Gracious of you. I know how busy your time is, and to you to give some of your insightfulness today. And again, you've been listening to Dan Gordon, the SVP of Strategy and Product Development at West Interactive. At the end of the webinar, you are actually tomorrow, 24 hours from now, you're going to get an email link with the actual webinar recording and all the slides that were sent out today. You're also going to get a survey. You folks are my customer, and I would appreciate if you could just take a moment and give me feedback about how you found today's webinar useful and any other insightful information. One other quick comments about Execs in the Know we're coming for our Canadian listeners. We're going to be for a one-day workshop in Toronto at the Royal Bank of Canada on June 7th. If that's something you'd like to join us in, it's an all-day workshop about some of the insights that we've been discussing. Let me know. Feel free to email Chad at Execs In The Know. And then finally, if you've not been to one of our national events, we hold the Customer Response Summit. It's a great brand-to-brand mentorship and executive forum. For 2 days, we're going to be in the wonderful city of Austin, Texas. And Dan, I know you'll be involved with us there too. That's September 18th through the 20th, and you can find all those details on our website. So on behalf of Dan Gordon and West Interactive, thank you so much. You've been a great guest for Execs in the Know. I encourage all of you to keep doing what you're doing. You have a very tough job. Keep the motivation and positive, making customer first. And we're here to help you in that journey. So, Dan, on behalf of us, I could not thank you more. Everyone have a great, great day. This now will conclude our webinar, and thank you for your time and attention.
You're welcome. Thank you, Chad. I appreciate it.